Alrighty guys, it is Quaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Z segment on what would happen if Goku never got the heart virus in both the original timeline and the History of Trunks timeline. And today's video request is from Stormcloak Courier. In today's video, I will state how I think the battle would have turned out if Goku was alive against the androids, the impact of Goku being alive on other characters, and I will also predict future events that may have altered with an alive Goku. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into the video, and for those of you who are interested, I'll leave a link in the description so you guys can check out a video on my Dragon Ball Z alternate timeline theory. So let's get started. So, let me begin by talking about the actual android battle itself. If every other event stayed constant as it had in the original timeline and Trunks' timeline, the androids would show up in age 767 and would try to kill all the Z fighters, including Goku, if he was there. In my opinion, I think that if Goku were actually alive, it would have made a difference, and here is how. First of all, the androids from Trunks' future are considerably weaker than the present time androids. And because of this, we need to keep in mind that Goku and the rest of the Z fighters would be fighting against weaker androids. Also, let's look at the fight in the present between Vegeta and Android 18. Even though Vegeta was considerably weaker than Android 18 and Android 18 was holding back against Vegeta, Vegeta held his own much better against 18 in the present compared to how he probably fought against Android 17 in the future. Because of this, if he had fought against future Android 17 or 18, he would have put up a much better fight if he was about the same strength as he was in the main timeline. Let me quickly mention, however, that in terms of power, Android 17 and 18 are virtually the same, with 17 being a tad bit stronger, similar to comparing Goten and Trunks in terms of strength. So I just wanted you guys to know this for a more accurate comparison of their powers. But one thing I should mention, however, is that if Goku stayed alive, if future Trunks wasn't around to warn the Z fighters of the upcoming android threat, the Z fighters would not have trained for 3 years, which helped them prepare for the android threat more than what was in the History of Trunks' time. But Goku by himself would simply have made a big difference. So it's important for me to give you guys the layout as to how these powers would have translated in the present as compared to the future. But let's move on to the first battle against the androids. During the first battle against the androids, I think that Goku would have been badly defeated, but not necessarily killed. Since Vegeta was shown to be a Super Saiyan in the History of Trunks timeline and in flashbacks, although it wasn't shown in the manga, let's assume that Vegeta was able to transform into a Super Saiyan. So, Goku would have probably lost because the Goku that arrived on Earth and killed Frieza and King Cole in Trunks' timeline has the exact same power as the one in the main timeline up until that point, although the main timeline Goku got much stronger over the next 3 years. With that said, the Goku that came to Earth and killed Frieza and King Cole cannot be significantly stronger than Future Trunks was, and Future Trunks was badly defeated by the dynamic duo alongside Super Saiyan Future Gohan. With all of that said, we can safely assume that without Goku pushing himself for those 3 years and not having a clue about the android's power would completely catch him off guard. But I would imagine that in a battle against the androids, Goku would be losing and would use his instant transmission to teleport his badly defeated friends, or whichever friends managed to survive, to Kami's lookout, where he would suppress his power to hide from the androids, if it was necessary, depending on whether or not the androids can sense their actual powers. Similar to the main timeline though, Vegeta, Goku, Gohan, and Piccolo would all probably end up going into the hyperbolic time chamber. Piccolo would most likely fuse with Kami after being defeated by the androids in battle as well, and to be honest, Piccolo fusing with Kami would be more than enough to defeat the androids one-on-one, since he held his own with a more powerful Android 17 in the main timeline after he fused with Kami, even if he didn't train as hard during the 3 years of peace. If the androids managed to not attack Goku and the Z fighters for at least a day, one of the main fighters would have been more than strong enough to defeat the androids, although they would have been weaker than their main timeline counterparts. So although he wouldn't have been able to defeat the androids at first, Goku would eventually have found a way to defeat them. Now that I have mentioned the fight against the androids, let me mention the impact on other characters. First of all, Goten would have been born for sure, if not earlier than Trunks was born, since Goku would have had more free time during the 3 years of training as compared to what he had in the main timeline. Also, Goku would have been a significantly better father to Gohan and Goten since he would have been alive. In terms of power, Goten and Trunks would probably be much stronger than the main timeline, and here's why. If Goten was born, Goku would cause Goten to be much stronger than he was in the World Martial Arts Tournament. Because of competition, Vegeta would train Trunks even harder as well to keep up with Goten. And as far as Gohan is concerned, although most of you would think he would be weaker, which he should be in the short run, he would be stronger in the long run due to Goku's influence, and Gohan wouldn't go for 7 straight years without training at all if Goku was there. So eventually, Gohan's hard work would catch up to his greater potential that was seen in the main timeline. I'm also factoring in that even if Gohan would have struggled to stay in the hyperbolic time chamber more than his main timeline counterpart did because the main timeline counterpart was stronger due to the 3 years of training, he would have had more of his hidden power unleashed that wasn't used as much from future Gohan. Because Goku would have been alive, Trunks would not have to go back in time because there would be absolutely no need since the androids would have been dead. This also impacts Cell, since Cell was planning on going back in time to absorb the androids as well. Since a time machine would have never been built in the first place, Cell would try to ambush one of the Z fighters and potentially absorb them for himself, but by the time Cell would have developed, he would be too weak for the main Z fighters, which includes Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks. But please take in mind that Cell would show up 10 years after the Buu Saga was to take place in terms of his development process. Now, let me mention what would have happened during the Majin Buu Saga. If the Buu Saga took place at a similar time to what we saw in the main timeline, there could be some major problems. Since Goku wouldn't have died, he would have learned Super Saiyan 3 much later on than he did in the main timeline when he died. So at most, Goku would be a Super Saiyan 2 by the time the Buu Saga arrived, and the same goes for Vegeta, Goten, and Trunks as well, along with Gohan. Since Goku never died, he would have never learned about the fusion, but could only fuse if the Supreme Kai gave him the earrings. This subtracts Gotenks as a potential character in the series. If the Z fighters did somehow manage to survive for a bit against Majin Buu and were able to transport to the Supreme Kai's planet, then maybe unlocking Gohan's hidden power would help them stop Fat Buu. But keep in mind that events may have been completely different, such as Gohan meeting Videl or Hercule or any of the characters which impacts Majin Buu's level of aggression. Also keep in mind that I'm considering the circumstance that if Buu was hatched, how that would have been played out. If Buu was never hatched, which is very possible, then none of this would have ever happened and Babidi and Dabura would have been killed, although the fight with Dabura would have been much more difficult at this point in time. One last thing that I want to mention alongside the Buu Saga is that although Vegeta would have probably have not been completely evil, he may be more aggressive since future Trunks wouldn't have been there to open up his heart more. Also, since Goku would have been on Earth instead of being dead, Vegeta would be more tempted to fight him as compared to the main timeline Vegeta, in which he was surrounded by Trunks and Bulma on Earth for so long, which caused him to soften up. This makes the Majin Vegeta arc unpredictable, as Vegeta would have been easier to turn since he would have been more aggressive, but at the same time, since he would be more aggressive, he wouldn't have a desire to make himself the old Saiyan Prince, since he kind of still would be that way anyways. I do think that even though it may have been slower, Vegeta would still become a good guy, especially if he and Goku would be forced to fight Majin Buu or any other major threat which would cause them to bond. Now, moving on to Dragon Ball GT, and for those of you who accept GT as a legitimate continuation of the Dragon Ball Z series, as far as the GT arc goes, since the Z Fighters would have used the Dragon Balls less, the negative energy wouldn't have been enough to unleash the Shadow Dragons, and the Z Fighters wouldn't have gone into space in the first place due to the Black Star Dragon Balls. When talking about power, however, Goku would be a bit weaker than his GT counterpart, but the rest of the Z Fighters would be much stronger to balance it out. So guys, that has been my video for today. I put a lot of thinking into how all these events would turn out. I'd like to thank Stormcloak Courier for giving me this topic, as I was able to go into so many directions. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on things that would have happened that I didn't mention. So please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, and remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.